What do you treasure most? What do you most desire? What do you spend most of your time, your energy, your work, your thinking on? These are the questions that I think underlie both of our readings today. At first, as we hear these stories about the Pharisees and the religious leaders, they can feel a little different than us, right? We don't often go about the streets praying out loud with verbose terms and that sort of thing. We don't cover ourselves in sackcloth. We don't blow trumpets before we give, right? That's not what we do. So sometimes it's really easy to step away from that. But then we have to ask, why are they doing this? Well, I think it's to look good, to look holy, to garner respect, to garner honor, to look right, to look important. As we start to understand their reasoning for this, I don't think it's quite as easy to separate ourselves from them. We do a lot every day to do just that. Sometimes we do good things more for us than for God, or even the people we serve. Sometimes it's our Christianity. It becomes a tool for this as we try to make ourselves look right or holy, or better than others. And this can be really bad. Because when we do this, we so often push others away. And when people really look at us, sometimes what they see is hypocrisy. And that can be just as bad. Just try working with a youth for more than a few moments, and they will see right through any pretend religiosity you have. But I think more often today, that isn't our biggest struggle. More often today, our struggle is hiding our faith. Is hiding our faith because it's going to be easier, because we don't want to avoid any conflict. Or we put our faith to the side because otherwise it might be awkward. And so we do the same thing by trying to hide our faith. We'd rather look good, look right in the eyes of others. But I think even more relatable to what the Pharisees and religious leaders are doing is what we so often see today in people trying to look righteous. You know, we see it with global warming. We see it in veganism. We see it in complaints about injustice. We see it in how hard people work or how much they're willing to give away. These aren't bad things. But when we make these things about us, when we try to get them to puff us up, then they become no better than hypocritical actions, right? They no longer have God's goodness flowing through them, and so they can't actually do God's good. Jesus knows that so often we can be more worldly than godly. So in today's reading, he's trying to point us in the right direction. He's trying to point us to where we should find our treasure, in him. And then he's trying to help us build up that treasure. And this is of absolute importance, because it is a God that all goodness lasts, right? Everything else in this world is fickle. Even the best things at one point or another will disappear. And I think we've all experienced this, right? Maybe it's a relationship. You know, all of us have experienced where something so good can be there in one moment and gone the next. It is only in God that those things can truly last. And so we must turn to him first and build our treasure in him. That doesn't mean we shouldn't care for the worldly things. In fact, it means the opposite. It means that we should incorporate and bring God into every bit of it, and so that everything can be built up in God, ourselves included. But all of those things won't last without him. To paraphrase C.S. Lewis, when we find a longing in ourselves that nothing in this world can satisfy, it must mean that we long for something that is beyond this world. Something beyond this world must be our treasure, or else we will lose it. It won't satisfy and it will disappear. And time again, if our hearts rest in that treasure, our hearts will be broken. Our lives will be broken. And even what seems to be good will be broken. It's interesting, though, that Jesus turns first to spiritual practices. He turns to fasting, to prayer, to giving, and to forgiveness. He doesn't start with our everyday lives, with our work, with our families. Instead, he's talking first about how we relate to him. Because he knows that that is where everything else comes from. Because that should feed into every other part of our lives. But so often when we do these things, we try to do it as a transactional engagement or encounter. When we pray, we're praying for something. We want something out of it. Fasting can do the same thing. When we give, we're expecting some kind of karma. And this isn't all bad, because a lot of spiritual practices actually have some really good worldly good. When we think about giving, this can be about acting out justice. A lot of us have been given a lot in our lives. We've been born into families that are loving, giving, gracious families. And so part of our duty, being given so much, means that we should build up the people that haven't been given so much. And so in some ways, we're acting out God's justice as we are bringing about that balanced, just world, right? Then there's been so many studies on fasting and prayer, how prayer helps to center us, helps us to understand who we are and what this world is. And fasting helps us to create good practices of sustainable living, of our own satisfaction and our own consumption, healthy practices. And then forgiveness. We've all experienced how forgiveness can repair relationships. These are all really good worldly things. And we shouldn't turn away from these things, but we must see where these things must first be centered in God himself. Because we know that justice without God does not look so just. We've seen it in our own world, right? How so often it can become about, what's that word? I'm blanking on this word. Precedent. It can become so much about precedent rather than showing mercy. And sometimes what someone really needs is mercy. In our relationships can be really good, but we have seen how when God isn't at the center, how they can break down and become a place of hurt rather than love and fellowship. We need God at the center of all things, or else even the good things that are at their very core can and will be lost. So we need to keep bringing God into it, or else even what good is there will be gone. And so today I want to look just a little more closely at these 4 spiritual practices, because as we come into Lent, I would love to invite each and every one of you to try one, if not all of them. So looking at what they mean for God especially. So giving, generosity. What generosity means is giving something that we would otherwise have to enjoy, that we would otherwise have to give to our friends and our families so that they might enjoy too. Rather, when we give them up, we are recognized that giving to God is more important. And we're recognizing that God will fill our needs, trusting in that. When we pray, we're giving of our time and our energy, trusting that the relationship that we build with God is at the very core of who we are and what we need, that it's the core of every other relationship. And so we give up time and energy that we put rather to entertainment and give it to God instead. Forgiveness or asking for forgiveness means giving up on our own feelings of self-righteousness, on our own right to be judged It means letting go of our own pain and trusting that God's mercy and justice is what we really need. And then fasting means giving up something we sometimes think we need. Maybe it's a practice, food, drink, an object. And an understanding that though a lot of the times we do actually need it, what we need more fundamentally is God. Because it is He who sustains us. It is He who brings us joy. It is Him that we find our true fulfillment. The great thing is that every time that we give and trust that God will meet us there, we have a truly faithful God, and He'll do just that. And so now, as we enter these 40 days, as we look towards when Christ gave up everything for us, and then redeemed that on the cross and in His resurrection, we are invited to do the same. To look at where we're willing to give and where we're not willing to give. And to give all the more. Trusting that God will meet us there. And so today, I want to invite you to enter a time of generosity, prayer, forgiveness, and fasting. None of these are easy practices, but all of them are important because they help us to center in God first and not ourselves. And so as you practice these, I have a prayer for each and every one of you. That as you do, you might meet God more and more face to face. You might see His love, His generosity, all that He's given for you. Because that's who He is. That's a part of His very character. He does that for us every day. Pray that you might have open eyes and open ears to see it, to hear it, and know it. Amen.